Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 157 of the Dynasty Junkies podcast, a proud member of the Dynasty Addicts Podcast Network, or the DAP Network, if you will. And I will. If you're watching us live on YouTube or even following along on YouTube later on, we really appreciate you being here. If you're listening in your ear holes on a podcast stream of some sort, we appreciate you listening and downloading. Definitely subscribe, rate, and review. Give us all that stuff. But before we get too far into this, I got to be honest. It's Andrew Hall. I'm at Andrew Hall FF. I'm here with my co-host with the most, I guess, Rocky at Dynasty FF Addict. How are you tonight, Rocky?
Not with the most shows recently.
No, it's okay.
But yeah, I'm very happy to be sitting here back with you, Andrew. It's been, I think, maybe 3 weeks since I've been, maybe longer. I don't even know.
It's been a minute.
Real life getting in the way and things like that. So I'm very happy to be. I always get to throw you on Trade Addicts whenever Russ doesn't show up. So we did do that in between my last show and this show, but still great to be back here on Junkies with you and with a great guest tonight.
That's right. With that guest, we've got the one and only John Hesterman at John_Hesterman. How are you doing tonight, John?
I'm doing great. I appreciate you guys having me on. I brought my radio face, so I think I'm good to go.
You're doing terrific. And I know you write for DLF. And we talked about this before the show started. You write Dynasty content at DLF and then DFS content at Fantasy Pros. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's where you can find my work.
I love it. If I can ask this question, though, John, which do you prefer? Which baby do you like more than the other, DFS or Dynasty?
Dynasty, I'm in for the long haul. You know, I've got so many teams that I brought up and misused and abused and screwed up. And, I'm kind of proud of what I've done with my children in that regard. So it's hard to not say the Dynasty stuff, but I really, over the last couple seasons, have really dug deep into DFS when it's active. And it's so maddening at times, but it can be also, just very, very fun to take down some contests from time to time. And so, yeah, I like both, but if I had to pick one over the other, I'm going with my babies. I'm going with my Dynasty squads.
And I'm the same way. I've been in Dynasty longer than I played DFS, and I really only did DFS for, I want to say, a year or two. It just wasn't my thing. Like it felt too fleeting and too I don't know, not emotional enough. With Dynasty, it's very emotional sometimes. You're like, man, this guy's out. My whole year is done. I got to turn into a rebuild. Your whole work schedule, the whole life of your team changes. With DFS, it's oh, so-and-so got hurt. Great. I'm not using him next week. And you just kind of throw him to the curb and move on. It just feels so I don't know, loveless to me.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of emotional detachment or detachment would be the better word from the DFS. Yeah, I'm just gonna make up words. That's why you guys brought me here, right?
We do that.
Hey, you're a wordsmith. I love it. Well, no, and I don't mind DFS. I think it's almost the exact opposite spectrum end from Dynasty, where it's like I said, it's just weekly. You're just in it for the weekly. In Dynasty, it's it could be years. You may be managing this team. I've got some teams I've been managing for 6 years now, and it's one of these days, one of these days we're going to win it, whether we want to or not.
And with me, to get first place, you often have to beat hundreds of people, whereas I only have to beat 11 people in Dynasty, or 13 or 15 at the most usually. Yeah,
that's a fair point. I like that logic.
For sure.
So we're here. Obviously, we're on Dynasty Junkies. We're going to talk Dynasty tonight. But of course, if anybody has any sort of DFS questions, they can hit you up on Twitter. Like I said. At John_Hesterman. Appreciate you, part of that _ family. So with that, let's kind of pivot into our talk for the night. We're looking at some wide receivers later, but our news is not necessarily wide receiver related, which I think is interesting. We were talking about this too, kind of who do we want to talk about? And Rocky, you mentioned this, so I'll kick it to you first. Jonathan Taylor to the pup, didn't get traded, didn't get signed to a new contract. There's a whole bunch of question marks around this guy. My big one is he actually hurt? But in all honesty, it doesn't matter, right? He's on the pup. That's what matters. He's not playing. What are you doing with Jonathan Taylor in Dynasty right now? Are you selling or are you holding if you have him?
Well, that's an interesting question, given our find me a trade later. But
yes. Foreshadowing.
In general, I'm mostly holding. But in my find me a trade later, I will be trading him away. But you are kind of selling low now if you move him, and I'll get into that when we do the find me a trade. But I do have concerns about him. I do worry that how much is he even going to play this year? You can say he should be back by week 5, but does he come back? Does he have another phantom injury because he's not getting paid? What I doubt he specifically holds out, but I could, he gets a stub toe or something. He might not be playing for a few games because he doesn't want to get himself hurt without his new contract. So, I definitely have concerns for this entire season, and the fact that you're already not getting a month out of him. I would rather hold and hope that he comes back and it's just Jonathan Taylor, but I don't blame anyone for trying to get out because I think this whole year has the potential to be a mess. I don't know that it will be, but it definitely has that potential. And if this whole year does, or most of this year gets blown up, I mean, he's a running back. He'll be about to be going into his 4th year. There's just a lot of concern there. So like I said, I'll get into a little more about his value and stuff when we get to find me a trade, but that's kind of where I'm at on it.
That's kind of where I'm at too. I feel like I'm not selling to sell, but I'm willing to entertain offers and kind of see what someone's willing to offer for him. I think there are still some people out there that are willing to pay what I would consider full price or close to full price. And I'm fine selling it close to full price, even if it's a 10% discount. You got a red light special or some sort of coupon, you know what I mean? Go ahead. Like I'm fine to give you the coupon, but I'm not selling as like a half price deal. Like that's not what we're doing here. John, are you kind of in the same page there where you're not really pushing to sell Jonathan Taylor, or are you kind of like done with this and just went off this ride?
Yeah, to quote one of my favorite movies, I'm like 7-Eleven. I'm not always doing business, but I'm always open.
Love it.
Yeah, so it kind of feels like that. Yeah, I'll entertain offers, but I'm not looking to move him on the cheap. I know people want to buy on the cheap, and I totally understand that. It's Dynasty. That's what we do. Yep. But I'm not giving up that asset on the cheap without having some clarity on the situation yet. I know the mitigating risk is a big part of what we do in Dynasty. And I know the risk is there and very present for a lost season. But I can't bail early for pennies on the dollar, not having some clarity. I'm going to kind of weather the storm for a little bit.
I'm with you there. I've got him on 2 different redraft teams, I want to say, and that I just drafted. One is my home league that I just drafted a week or 2 ago. And I got him in the, I want to say the 4th round of a 1 keeper league. So it's kind of like a 5th round pick. And at that point, I was just kind of looking around the room like, is no one going to, like, I'll take the risk. You know what I mean? Like, that's low enough for me. Maybe something happens. Maybe he comes back. Maybe he plays. And then, of course, the news comes out where he's on the PUP. And it's like, well, that's a bummer. But I'm still okay. Like, it's a redraft league. So it's not like it's that big of a deal. I've still got other players. And then actually, I did make a trade. I was curious because I made this trade last night. And it's an HQ3, which is obviously a Dynasty league with the Trades HQ guys. And there was a new manager that came in, Troy, who was a friend of the show, Voice and Fuego, decided to take over an orphan team. And so he comes in, and as I do with orphans too, I'm like, all right, I'm making some moves. Let's go in, see what players I can move and all this. So I sent him an offer that was Jonathan Taylor, Velus Jones, and a 3rd, which are pretty much nothing picks. Like those are just roster spots at this point. So Jonathan Taylor, Velus Jones, and a 3rd for Kenneth Walker, Cortland Sutton, and Kareem Hunt. And I was like, I think I'm fine with this. There's a chance that Kareem Hunt gets signed somewhere still, and maybe even at the Colts, to be honest. Maybe he's the guy there. I think Kenneth Walker to Jonathan Taylor is obviously a tier down, but not like a big tier. I think there's still some value there, and he's younger, and maybe they have some attitude there. But Cortland Sutton, I think, is going to have a good year with Jerry Jeudy having some issues. Like, so my logic was like, I'm trading Jonathan Taylor, which is a question mark and not getting points, for Kenneth Walker and Cortland Sutton, who are both going to be in my lineup. And in that league, it's a start 11, 12-team league. Like, you need starters. And I was like, well, I'm fine to get out of this and just sort of play the game. And Rocky, I'll kick it to you first. I mean, what is this a terrible trade? Did I mess this up? Or do you feel like that's the kind of discount you were talking, like that's worth taking?
Yeah, no, I don't hate that at all. I have some questions about how the whole Walker Charbonnet thing is going to work out.
Same. Yeah.
But at least he's going to be playing. We've seen some explosiveness from him last year. And I kind of, I'm like, it's like, fool me once, shame on you, fool me, shame on me with Cortland Sutton. But yeah, I'm kind of getting back into Cortland Sutton a little
bit. I do this every year.
With all the injuries and everything, I've already been expecting Russ to bounce back. He can't possibly be as bad as last year. Plus, Peyton is there now, and at least for the first month of the season, Sutton's going to be his number one. Or I think it's going to be about a month before Judy's back, maybe a little less. I'm not sure right now, but. Sure. But yeah, Sutton's going to be his number one receiver at least. Should get the most targets there, and then maybe if that goes well, they have that rapport, then maybe it kind of sticks. So I don't hate that at all. I think that's a a decent return right now. And I definitely think there's a chance that, like, if this season does go wrong from Taylor, whatever happens with him, that his value never kind of rebounds to where it once was. So I don't mind getting those points. And if Walker does like hold down the lead spot there, that could be really nice for you. If Charbonnet is just sort of mixed in as more of a clear 1B or 2 than like co 1A
1A 1B. Yeah, and with Sutton, I'm ready to get hurt again. That's really what it is. Like Sean Payton's there. The optimism is shining through. This has got to be. It's going to be great. It may not. I'm totally fine with that.
Last year I was setting over Judy last year, and I flipped that after I saw what happened last season. I'm not an idiot. But now Sutton's sucking me back in.
I might be an idiot. I'm just going to say it that way. I'm definitely a junkie, so who knows? But yeah, what do you think, John? Does that seem like a pretty fair return for Taylor, or would have tried to get more? I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's better than some of the offers that I fielded in the places that I've had him. So yeah, I mean that's one that would have at least gotten a little thought out of me instead of being an auto decline. So yeah, you're getting something of value. And you mentioned the points. You're getting points on the board for the season. The potential range is a little bit different, obviously, going from Walker to Taylor. But if Taylor doesn't play, if they put him on the NFI list, if he ends up staying on the pup because, like you mentioned, he stubbed his toe and he doesn't want to get hurt without a contract. Like, there's so many variables to it. You have for sure points going on the board now, and not in a bad way. So yeah, I'm okay with that trade.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a chance that Jonathan Taylor eats some bad gas station sushi and he's just like, I'm done, I'm out, send me down. I'm going to be on the toilet for the next 8 weeks, coach. Like, who knows? Like, that fear is kind of always there. And in Dynasty, as a rebuilding team, Taylor's somebody I'm targeting. Like, if I have a team that is bottom 3 and I'm looking at a top 3 pick, I have no problem at all writing out the Taylor Storm, because why not? And I'm fine to buy him cheap. This to me felt like a good enough price where it's like, it's a fair trade. I don't think either one of us is fleecing the other. It feels pretty average to me. And again, like we were just talking about, Walker and Sutton both have their question marks. Hunt doesn't even have a team. So in a year, we might look back on this like, well, that was a dumb trade. Like, holy crap, Jonathan Taylor's a terrific asset and he's back in his good graces and everything's fine. So yeah, it's just, that's where I'm at with Jonathan Taylor. It's just like, I don't know. It worries me. And that league too, like there's one dominant team in that league that's like, top, I think he's got 3 of the top 10 receivers and like 8 of the top 20 receivers. Like he's stacked. You know what I mean? Like, it's going to take something crazy to happen. So my logic is I might as well shoot the moon. Like, let's just have fun with this. That's the whole point of Dynasty, right? And again, being junkies, I'm just in it for the trading. The other thing we want to talk about with JT going to the pup and all this is obviously who replaces him, right? And there was some news that came out today. I think, John, you mentioned this before the show. Like, Zach Moss now might be ready for week 1 or maybe week 2 or something like that. That could be nice. And we still got Deion Jackson, who's kind of been there before. And then the rookie, Evan Hall. I mean, John, I'll kick it to you first. Which of these 3 guys do you want? Let's assume they're all the same cost, which may not entirely be true, but they're close enough. But if, let's say all 3 of these are on the waiver, which one are you trying to claim the most? Which one do you want on your team?
I would say, while I believe that Zach Moss gets the audition first, I really like Evan Hall. I'm an Evan Hall person. I like the talent. I like the relative athletic score. I know the draft cost isn't indicative of guaranteeing playing time. And that's the biggest struggle right now. And being someone that's a big fan of Evan Hall is realizing that there's not enough of an investment to where they're saying we have to give this guy the ball. So for that reason, like, Zach Moss, I think has the early shot there, assuming he's healthy and back from, it was a broken hand, wasn't it?
Arm, I thought it was.
Arm,
but yeah,
broken
same
arm.
idea.
Yeah.
Appendage.
So right, yeah, one of those things you hold the ball with. Got it.
Yeah, important.
Yeah, a little bit. So assuming he's healthy, so the season may open with Deion Jackson, and then it might shift to Deion Jackson / Evan Hull split, in which case that's what I'm looking for, is when that split occurs and Evan Hull can show the NFL what he can do. But at some point, Zach Moss is going to be a factor in that too. The reality is this could be just a really hideous rotation on a team where the quarterback is just as prone to take off running as it is to hand it off anyway. So this might be a whole bunch of discussion about, snipes and fairies and things of that nature. So
yeah, things that don't matter at all. I agree with you 100%. Yeah. Well, so Rocky, which of these three guys would you pick? If you again, let's assume they're all on waivers and you've got the number one claim and there's no cost. Again, in Dynasty, that's always different and every league is different. But let's assume you didn't have to pay anything other than a waiver claim. Which one do you want?
Well, that John kind of stole what I was going to say at the end there, where it's like, I'm not sure I want any of them because I think, like he said, it could just be a whole big mishmash of, hot hand, that kind of thing. But I think I lean with him. I'd rather take the unknown of the rookie with Evan Hall. Deion Jackson actually did flash a little bit in a couple starts he got last year. But I don't expect him to be like Johnson. I don't expect him to be the guy that they put out in front there. It'll probably be Moss. And I'd rather just go with the unknown. It could be a boat of Evan Hall.
That's right. That's right.
I know you
love the reference. Yeah. Love the reference.
Yeah.
Andrew uses that one frequently. Yeah,
That's
it could be anything.
Favorite.
It could be a boat. So I'd rather we're not bringing in costs. It's just everybody's equal. I'm taking the chance on Hall over the other two guys.
Well, so my answer is kind of the same but different. I'm taking the chance on Deion Jackson because I think he's the one that sees the biggest spike first. I think Deion Jackson is the guy that's going to turn around in week 1 or 2 and get like one of those random, which we see this every year, which frustrates everybody, but like one of those random like 100-yard and a touchdown kind of games. He puts up like 19 PPR points and is the darling of every waiver wire article out there, right? Like it's just everybody's ready. Got to pick up Deion Jackson. He's clearly the guy. And then in week 2, it's Evan Hall with 85 yards and 2 touchdowns. And everyone's like, I don't know anymore. Like we don't know anything, right? We have no clue. So my thought is I think Deion Jackson's the one that's going to return that value quickest or is going to spike the first. And that's who I want on my team. And then I'll trade that guy away for Evan Hall in a third or like Evan Hall in a fourth. You know what I mean? Like give me that other player who I think has a longer longevity kind of an idea. But again, it depends on your league. If it's not an active league, then yeah, go get Hall. I think that's probably a fine idea. But if you're in like a trade addicts league, for instance, or someone that a lot of us that listen to this show are kind of crazy degenerates that just play in a ton of dynasty leagues, I'm trying to get as much as I can at Deion Jackson because I know I'm going to trade him all away. And just like as soon as he does anything, I'm done. I'm out. Like Deion Jackson and Cortland Sutton for a second or some crazy thing. Like let's just pin them together. Let's go, So I don't think there's a wrong answer, which is the best part. We won't know what's wrong until the end of week 1 anyway.
Right.
But again, the fact that it's not Taylor makes everybody kind of like meh, and not really that excited. So the other parts of news that we want to mention, and again, John, this is a great idea on your part. The guys, some guys that fell to IR, which kind of shocked some people. I know we had cut downs and we had a lot of different roster moves, and I've still been just trying to catch up on all my teams and making sure I don't have free agent guys on my roster, and making sure that I'm paying attention to the right players. But IRs are an interesting one because when a player gets moved to IR at this time of year, it's most likely a short-term IR, not every time, but they're going to miss the first 4 to 6 weeks or something like that. I forget the rules anymore. But these guys are able to get put into your IR spot on your roster, which if you have IR spots, might as well use them. It's very unlikely that you have a lot of people on there now. We haven't had a lot of injuries, of course. Games haven't even started. And a lot of players, whether your league allows suspended or out or whatever, if it's just IR, there are some players that just hit that full IR this week, like Jeffrey Wilson, Jelani Woods, and Kenny Nwangwu, the 3 that we have to list here. And I love moving guys to IR to free up a roster spot so I can go get somebody else off that waiver wire. And we're seeing some leagues too that might have one waiver wire run still coming up before the season on next Wednesday. Now is the time to scour your team and make sure you check to see if you have anybody that can fit in that IR slot. And then that frees you up to pick up somebody. So of the 3 here, John, I'll kick it to you first. Which of these 3 do you feel like is maybe the one you want to stash the most? I have a feeling I know what it is, but what IR guy are you looking to like put on your roster as your IR and then move from there?
I would, if I'm going to scoot someone, Jeff Wilson.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's probably going to be fairly consistent between the 3 of us, but he was the biggest surprise, I think, too. Like,
yeah.
I was not, we knew they were talking about Jelani Woods and battling. I wasn't even sure. I had to ask what even the injury was to Jeff Wilson, and even that's vague. I heard midsection and finger. Someone correct me if new news has come out.
I did hear midsection too, and like, what is that? A rib injury? Did his butt hurt?
What's
what are we talking about?
Did he fart too hard? What
torso?
What,
it's his torso section. Like what?
His C-section scar hurts. I don't know what midsection.
He has a tummy ache, John. That
so
gas station
one
sushi,
was
right?
Gas station. See, it affects all of us. So he would be the one that I'd be willing to take the stash on because I think we saw the tandem work last year, and now they've got an extra piece to that. So he is someone that is going to have a role. And let's be honest, if we're being honest, Raheem Mostert healthy is just a pre-injured condition.
Yeah, it's like he's about to be injured every time he touches the ball. You're like, well, next time I'll probably get injured. Yeah, I'm kind of with you. Maybe I'll put it this way then, Rocky. Any thoughts on Jelani Woods? I mean, is he somebody you're stashing on IR because you think he might come back, or was he that close and had that short of a leash that maybe you're willing to drop him now, I guess?
No, I would. Yeah, I don't have a ton of Jelani Woods shares, but where I do, I'm not dropping him. So, still a young player, and it's not like I'm not super bullish on the passing offense this year with Anthony Richardson. But I'm not giving up on it. If I'm drafting a rookie tight end, especially one that wasn't super touted coming out, I'm probably rostering that guy for at least 3 years anyway, hoping something happens eventually. So him going to IR for like a month isn't going to change that one way or the other for me.
No, I completely agree. I mean, obviously that was a trap question. Like we all know the answer there, but I thought I'd throw you a softball. It's been a minute.
Appreciate it, Andrew.
But also, I mean, like Jelani Woods, there's one league I'm in that's a 2 tight end league. And I'm like, well, in a 2 tight end league, I'm not dropping any tight end. Like if you're even on a roster at this point, like you need like 7 tight ends on your roster, so like Jelani Woods is definitely going to my IR on those. And I'm even trying to add, Josh Wiley, I think is his name, like let's get some of these other deeper like tight end guys to maybe fill that backup tight end spot behind Mo Alley Cox. That's how desperate he gets. The other one though, I mentioned, go ahead, Rocky. Sorry.
I was going to say it would have to be a really short roster to even think about dropping them for me. Like the leagues we play in are usually tight end premium and often have 28 to 32 roster spots. So in something like that, I'm not dropping them.
Well, and it's funny because like I know we mentioned like Kenny Nwangwu, which I have in a bunch of places. After Dwayne McBride got cut, I started picking him up. Even though he's more of a special teamer, I just feel like he's still going to be a running back on the roster, and they might need him. There's some other guys too, just kind of looking at some different rosters. Like Tyquan Thornton hit the IR, Kyle Phillips hit the IR. Like some of these players I have on my deeper bench, like 40-man rosters. It's like, well, those guys are still viable options, and we actually have both of those guys in Dynasty Junkies 1, Rocky. But it's like those are kind of players that I don't usually think about, right? Yeah, they're not exciting,
Right.
But guess what? I get to move them over to my IR or our IR and pick up somebody else. So that's kind of fun. So yeah, the logic of this is there really isn't a whole lot of quote unquote news right now. It's more of like just roster movement and construction. And obviously all these teams are doing their best to keep up with all of it. And all we can do is, wait for our platform of choice to kind of update their own world. But I think that pretty much covers it. But if you can get IR, definitely move that over. Pay attention to your taxi squad. If there's someone on your taxi that got cut and you can make a move before the season starts or before it locks, definitely take a look at that. It's worth a quick reminder because I know in some of my leagues, I'm like, oh, right, let me do that now. And then it locks week 1 and you're stuck. So like, I'd really rather check now. I know in one league I had Cameron Peoples was on my taxi squad and he was on Carolina, got drafted or something, or undrafted free agent even, and got cut. And I'm just like, oh, thank God. So now I can drop him and move somebody back to taxi before the season locks. So just more of a heads up to those Dynasty Junkies out there listening. Just keep track of your rosters. It's always for the best.
Yep.
Any other news you guys want to mention before we move on? Didn't think so. I know Matthew Wiggins is here in the chat saying McBride is on the practice squad. That's good news. That is a good point. I mean, McBride's not gone, but practice squad to me still doesn't bode that well. The other one that I thought was odd, speaking of practice squad, was the New England Patriots quarterback situation, right? Where Mac Jones is the only active quarterback on their roster. They put Bailey Zappi and Malik Cunningham. They waived them both and then put them both on practice squad. I'm just like, do they know something we don't?
I think I saw they signed Matt Corral today.
Oh, of course they did. Yeah. That just makes things weirder all around, right?
Yeah. So who knows what's going on? It looks like Mac Jones. The basic takeout of this Mac Jones job is pretty secure. It looks like.
Well, yeah, that's actually a fair point. Yeah, I mean, there's no one itching on his heels. That's for damn sure. Yeah, we got Dame confirming in the chat. Thank you, Dame. Appreciate that. So with that, let's move into our main topic of the night, which is wide receivers, sleepers, and busts. We've covered a lot of these positions over the course of the last, 3 or 4 months, even at this point. But I feel like this is the time of year to kind of start talking about values and like how you can maybe, find an edge in your league. So let's get into some different options. I'll kind of go around the room here and give each of you a couple of different options of who you think are sleepers and busts. And before we get into this, it's something I've said on other shows. How you define these is kind of up to you. There really isn't like a definite definition of these things. Like the term sleeper has been widely used by so many people. I did see an article, I think it was last year, where they talked about DeAndre Swift being a sleeper with the Lions. And I'm just like, I don't know if that counts. You know what I mean? Like, hang on a minute. Like, I'm pretty sure we're all aware of him. No one's sleeping on that. So it kind of varies on how you want to define it, which I like, but it's annoying to read. I'll just put it that way. But with that, Rocky, I want to kick it to you first. Which of the top 100 wide receivers, which is what I put in the show sheet for the sake of argument, this is DLF from August, ADP in 2023, of course. Which of these wide receivers, which one, I guess, stands out to you as the most sleeper option? Let's start with the sleepers first.
Okay. I had two, well, maybe three guys that came to mind when I was looking over this list. One is more highly ranked. I'll say him first because I do think his value could go up, which is Brandon Ayuk. I still feel like he's a little under the radar in terms of. I was not an Ayuk guy early, but over the last couple of years, he has impressed me. I try not to get take lock on guys unless it's Zach Wilson or Ronald Jones. But
excellent example.
Yes. So and I just feel like he's the most talented guy there. Actually, I like him better than Debo. I do think I'm not in love with Purdy, but Ayuk is kind of perfect in that he can just kind of get in the ball, and Ayuk can do can make things happen after the catch. I think he could be. He could definitely go up in value from 23, wide receiver 23, which is where he's at in this ADP, if he performs the way I think he will. And I do think he'll get you a decent amount of points. I do think it's going to be a pretty good offense, even though I'm not a big Purdy guy, just because they have so much talent there with Kittle and CMC and Debo and Ayuk. And, it's going to be hard not to score no matter who your quarterback is. So, I think Ayuk's going to be kind of the one that maybe, at least in the passing game, that takes the lead there. So he was my first one. I don't know if you want me to keep going or we go.
Well, no, let's talk about that for a second. So Ayuk, I think, is a fine choice for sleeper because 23 does feel a little low to me.
I just want to say too, I think sleeper is a little strong, but just a guy who can go up in value.
Underrated. I don't know.
That was more what I was thinking with that one.
That's perfectly fine. I love the way you defined that. You're entirely wrong. This is terrible. No, I'm just kidding. I think I said it last year a couple different times during Purdy's run where I'm like, I feel like anybody could play quarterback for the Niners and be successful. Like, you just got to be like, step back 3 times, even out of shotgun, and just whale it and duck. You know what I mean? Like, you'll be fine. Like, hand it off to CMC, you'll be okay.
Little asterisks. I mean, anybody but Trey Lance.
True. Yeah. That's well put, John. That's right. Trey Lance is not successful there. Anybody but Trey Lance. You're exactly right. They don't want him at all.
Jesse in the chat is kind of backing up the underrated thing because he says San Francisco pass catchers scare me. That's kind of what the issue is that there is so much talent there. So who's gonna? Yeah. But I do think IU can kind of come to the forefront, sure, the way Debo did a couple of years ago.
Well, and that's actually where I wanted to go with this is more like the pass catchers there do scare me because I don't know where they're going to go. There's so many options, right? Like that makes all of them a little less valuable in a sense. It's not like a funnel where you know where they're going to be. I did see one redraft league I was watching, or I think it was either that or a mock. It might have been a mock where Ayuk went before Debo. And I was like, okay, that's a little nuts to me. I still feel like Debo is the number one guy there, but hell, I don't know. Like we don't know that. And I feel like if you really think Debo is, on the downturn and declining, and you think Ayuk is on the uprise, put your money where your mouth is, right? But John, what do you think about Ayuk? Does that whole offense scare you too? Or are you kind of like, are you in on Ayuk at this price?
I like Ayuk at the price. Yes, that offense is frustrating because you're right. This could be a Kittle week. This could be a Debo week. This could be a CMC week. I don't know if you guys remember that guy. So there's so many options. Yeah, it does make it hard to go all in on somebody, but I really like what I saw from Ayuk last year, the growth that he's shown over the last few years after the whole doghouse thing. Like he's really stepped up. And what I like is it doesn't matter how far down the field he gets a hold of the ball. He is creating yards almost every time, and that's fun to watch. So I do like Ayuk. I kind of like the price point as well. In that range, he's definitely someone that has upside, and yeah, I'm good with it.
Yeah, I mean, wide receiver 23. I mean, you're not spending a ton at that cost. I mean, just for the sake of this discussion, like right ahead of him is Calvin Ridley, Terry McLaurin. Right after him is Jerry Jeudy, DJ Moore. Like all of those guys have different kinds of question marks, right? Like whether it's the offense or the play or the injury, whatever. Like they all have different things, and I think Ayuk is, I don't know, just as good as any of those guys. He belongs in that space. But I think
Agreed.
the upside of Ayuk might be higher than those guys. Maybe not McLaurin, but that's, again, we're talking about upside, like best possible case, right? But yeah, I don't mind that at all, Rocky. I think that's a good sleeper. So why don't we go to you, John? What's a sleeper that you're thinking about and kind of looking at these values? Which one do you want on your team?
So we'll start by kind of how I define sleeper, or how I think of it, because it used to mean something way back in the day when information wasn't as readily accessible, and now there's so many smart people. The market's saturated. Everybody's got takes. The true days of the actual like sleepers are gone.
Yeah.
Now it's more about finding the right risk to take on players that the markets are valuing below where their production could land. That's a lot to put on a business card. I'm going to have to figure out how to shorten that up. Anyway, that
Feels
being
like an
said,
acronym waiting to be. Yeah.
right. Sky Moore. Sky Moore, someone I want to talk about. Was there hype last season? Yes, there was. Did he achieve anything remotely close that could be defined as success? Unless you count 274 scrimmage yards and 3 fumbles, that's 43.4 PPR points for those of you scoring at home. Unless you count that as success, no, he didn't. But so now his ADP has dropped. He's wide receiver 46 in startup formats. There's been really good talk out of camp. We knew what kind of hands he had coming into the NFL. We knew about his versatility. Now he's got a full year under his belt in an Andy Reid / Patrick Mahomes offense. Wide receiver 46, that's a risk I'm willing to take at the price.
I like the way you put that. I think that's actually a pretty fair idea. What do you think, Rocky? You on the same page here?
Yeah, I definitely, like you said, at that price. I mean, it's hard to figure out what is going to happen with the Chiefs passing game. Somehow, Patrick Mahomes lights it up for 4,500, 5,000 yards every year, and they never, since Tyreek left, they don't have anybody at receiver, and when even Tyreek was there, they had nobody else except Kelsey. So, so it's kind of amazing that kind of no one stepped into that void. I was just looking while he was talking. I mean, last year, Juju had 78 for 933. If Sky Moore could approach those numbers, that alone would give him a big value boost. Even though that's not like an amazing season, that's, I think, far surpassing the expectations most have for Sky Moore this year. So, and I kind of feel like somebody has to at least have decent numbers there besides Kelsey. It's just a matter of who it's going to be. I don't hate that. I don't even say I don't hate that, because that implies that I'm hesitant on it. I do like that, because like you're paying almost nothing. Sky Moore is going to be like a throw in a trade. No one's trading directly for Sky Moore. You can probably get him thrown in on a bigger deal. Wide receiver 46, you're talking like a third. I would totally be fine with taking the shot on Sky Moore and see what happens.
Yeah, what's interesting is that there are 5 Kansas City Chiefs, actually 6 technically, in the top 100 here, right? We've got, which is bonkers to me, because it's really just because, like we were saying before with Ayuk, like we don't know who it's going to be. And so everybody's just like taking flyers on whoever they can find, because it could be that guy. It could be a boat, right? Like it's the whole thing. So I think it's interesting. Sky Moore is number 46 in DLF ADP. We got Rashee Rice at 53. I'm sorry, Kadarius Toney at 51. Rashee Rice at 53. Then we go all the way down to MVS, Marquez Valdez-Scantling at 77, Justin Ross right behind him at 78, and then Richie James at 98. So it's like there is literally, that's 6. If you just do the math, that makes no sense. There's 32 teams. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't make any sense. There's no way that all 6 of these guys are going to be top 100 worthy. 4 of them are going to be wrong. The thing is, we don't know which 4 it's going to be.
Yeah.
And honestly, like if the best wide receiver on Kansas City, again, not counting Travis Kelce because he's not a wide receiver, if the best wide receiver is wide receiver 46, that's exactly where I want to go to. I'm with you, John. That's a good pick. So I have a couple different versions of sleeper, and I think that the way I tend to word it is someone who maybe people are undervaluing. They're falling asleep on him. They're not, asleep at the wheel, like all that kind of stuff. But the term sleeper is also kind of odd, because in Dynasty, contending versus rebuilding kind of makes a difference enough, where it's like a contending team that's not a sleeper to a contending team. Like that makes no sense. That guy's, a year out from being, from playing. And a rebuilding team, that makes no sense. Like Adam Thielen is a guy I want to mention as a sleeper. I think Adam Thielen could have a good year this year. I'm actually excited for Adam Thielen this season. And his price is very low. Wide receiver 85 in Dynasty right now for Carolina. That's basically free. I mean, you're talking about a 4th rounder might get you that. But if I'm a contender and I have Adam Thielen, I'm not giving him up unless it's a second. Like it's something crazy. Because like, why? I think that he's going to score points, and I could use points. I'm trying to get points. So I think he's one of those guys that the value is kind of all over the place. And if you see a rebuilding team with Adam Thielen, who obviously is getting older and is past his prime and is with a new team on a new offense, like, man, there is a whole bunch of stuff that could make you hate Adam Thielen all by itself. But if you're a rebuilder, you don't want those points. You don't want him on your roster. He's not going anywhere. So to me, that's like a definition of a quote unquote deeper sleeper, is that like Adam Thielen, I think, could still score plenty of points. And again, Matthew Wiggins, love it in the chat right here. Do you have a good Thielen about it? I do have a good Thielen about it this year, man. I'm telling you, I think Thielen is going to do well. I'm hooked on a Thielen. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just feel like he's got that potential on a new offense with a rookie quarterback. That's about as deep of a sleeper as you can get, too. Wide receiver 85. I mean, you're talking about cheap with Sky Moore. Guess who's cheaper? Adam Thielen. You could get Sky Moore for Adam Thielen in a third. You know what I mean? Like, they're both cheap, but give me Adam Thielen in a third at this point. Like, that's just points. What do you think about that one, Rocky? Are you on the same page as me, or are you out on Thielen?
No, I mean, again, I don't think he's going to be anything amazing, but he could certainly be. No, I'm kidding. He could certainly be like a wide receiver 3 type, flex starter for you. Like, again, talking, most of the leagues we're in are 10, 11, 12 starters. He can. I think he'll be able to start for you every week in that kind of league. Yep. Like I said, I think probably wide receiver 3-ish. She'll maybe have a boom week here or there. I'm not super confident how that offense is going to go year one, but Bryce Young's a rookie. We'll see how it goes. But I think you're getting points there, and I think he probably leads that team in targets. I mean, Mingo's a rookie. Chark is Chark.
Chark's there, yeah.
But he would make the most sense as the guy to lead the team in targets, which, if you're getting like 10 to 12 points a week from him, I'll take that from wide receiver 85. I'm
happy as hell with that. I didn't do this much with Sky Moore. We should go back for a second. Around Sky Moore, you've got Tyler Lockett, Gabriel Davis, Cortland Sutton, Brandon Cooks. Like, those guys in my mind are maybe going to cost a little more than Sky Moore. You may be able to get Sky Moore for cheaper.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and then the other thing is on Adam Thielen, you got players like Donovan Peoples-Jones, Chase Claypool, who everyone hates for some reason, Josh Palmer and Keyshawn Boutte in New England. Like, those guys are almost on waivers in some leagues. You know what I mean? Like, we're just getting really low there. And I just think Adam Thielen is in my mind, I'm with you. Like, let's say he's a top 50 receiver this year and you're getting him at 85 price. Like, I'm fine with that. Like, I don't have to spend much and the reward is high. John, what about you? What do you think about Thielen before we get into your next sleeper?
I like Thielen. I like the price point. What I like about Thielen is the situation. Everybody's scared because it's a rookie quarterback and a new offense. Well, guess what? A sure-handed, soft coverage, middle of the field, reliable receiver is a really good blankie for a rookie quarterback.
That's right.
So yeah, he's going to have some production. Is it going to be otherworldly and his double-digit touchdowns from the days of yore? No. But is he going to put up points on a consistent, reliable basis every week? Yeah, he will. So yeah. I love the price point. That's a good one.
Yeah. And again, I think it's more the price than the player, right? I always not the player, that kind of thing. And for me, again, that price is juicy, man. I'm telling you, I'd much rather have him over Chase Claypool, Keyshawn Boutte, Khalil Shakir. I just dropped in the league. You know what I mean? Like, we're literally talking about these guys down here where no one cares. Terrace Marshall, Darius Slayton, like, these guys are waiver wire fodder. And I still think if Adam Thielen is being ranked there, give me Adam Thielen every day. So, John, what's your second sleeper on the list that you could come up with for this one?
Nico Collins. And
or what's another sleeper, I guess?
Yeah, Nico. This isn't sorry. Again, this isn't super sexy. I'm not going to pretend. It's not like he had some awesome rookie season. Of course, that offense didn't define awesome in any facet last season. But he's going off as wide receiver 60, which here's the correlation. That's pretty far down the list for a team's starting wide receiver 1. He's going to enter the season and operate through the season as their de facto number 1. Yes, we're back to the rookie quarterback situation. And yes, that is going to like devalue to a certain extent as he learns the role. But he's still going to more than likely lead that team in targets and probably fairly easily. So getting him at wide receiver 60 as being the primary focal point for an offense, I'm good with that.
It just sounds a lot like what we just said with Adam Thielen, right? Rookie quarterback. There's a lot of guys we don't know, and we don't know who's going to be the guy. But yeah, wide receiver 60 is the number 1 receiver for Houston. That's bonkers to me. It's the same logic. Like, someone's got to catch these passes. Like,
Yeah.
do you really think, CJ Stroud's going to throw 2,000 yards and Nico Collins is only going to get 300 yards? Like, no, he's still going to get 600, 700, 800 yards easy. Like, come on, this is ridiculous. And then again, for the sake of, full discussion here, we've got John Mechie is the next receiver for Houston at wide receiver 74. Tank Dell, who flashed in the preseason at 76. And then Robert Woods, the journeyman veteran at 94. You could make an argument that Robert Woods is even cheaper than Thielen, but I don't have nearly the confidence in Woods that I do in Thielen. Like, Woods is obviously going to be a guy, but I could see him retiring by week 4 because he had 7 catches and that's it. He's just done.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm entirely with you. I love Nico Collins. What about you, Rocky? Your thoughts on that one as a sleeper pick?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's sort of it's a lot like without the performance history, but it's sort of similar to the Thielen idea. Basically, is that there's not a lot else there. They got to throw to somebody. He's probably going to be the lead target getter of those guys. So yeah, why not? Wide receiver 60 again. We're talking low price points here. So I like that one.
Love it. Yeah. Now, what was another sleeper? I don't want to say it's only your second, but like, what's another sleeper on this list of top 100 that you find yourself, can't stay away from?
See, I didn't go as deep as you go. I didn't go to 85 or 60.
This is perfect. No, this is good for the content, Rocky.
This would be, I guess, more mid-tier, given we have 100 here. So,
that's right.
But I mean, this guy is one of the few that we've talked about that's actually, that I believe is tied to a good quarterback. Some may argue that at this point, but Deshaun Watson, I expect to bounce back this year, and I like Elijah Moore on that team at wide receiver 40. He had a pretty much lost season last year with the trash that the Jets had at quarterback. And Garrett Wilson came in, and Garrett Wilson is a better receiver, and he proved that. But Elijah Moore had like a month, 6-week stretch with some trash quarterbacks where he looked like he just was popping out like gangbusters there. So he looked like a wide receiver 1. So I like the idea of Elijah Moore, and again, more of a guy, like, rather than go send a second for him, try and get him included in trades or something like that. Because I don't think people are thinking that much about him. And Amari Cooper is there. I get that. But he is 30 now, or approaching 30. And
might as well be. I don't know.
Yeah. And even if Amari Cooper does well, I mean, if Watson is going to bounce back, like I think he will, and look more like Deshaun Watson we saw before all the stuff happened, those 4,000 to 4,500 yards have to go somewhere if he has a similar type season to what he's had in the past. If he's horrible, then this probably goes to hell. But I expect that now that he's gotten games played under his belt, he's got a normal off season, that I think we're going to see something more like the Deshaun Watson of the past, and maybe not quite as high statistically, but a lot closer than what we saw last season. So I like taking the shot on Elijah Moore. Still young too, so if he has a good season, that value is going to skyrocket.
Well, and again, Elijah Moore is just a new scenery. Maybe that's all he needed to kind of show his talent too. I think that's exactly right. John, what do you think about Elijah Moore this year? Are you in or are you out?
Well, to go back to kind of what Rocky said, like talking about Deshaun Watson back in the day, when Deshaun Watson was putting up those QB5 finished seasons, he was doing so with DeAndre Hopkins and Will Fuller. He was supporting 2 fantasy viable wide receivers. So there is a path. If Watson does return to, say, 85% of what Watson used to be, then there's room in this offense for someone like Elijah Moore to operate at a fairly good level. And you're right. If he's throwing 4,000 or 5,000 yards, they got to go to someone. And I think Elijah Moore is going to be playing with a chip on his shoulder. I think he's ready to show, New York, like, hey, you should have given this a chance.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if Elijah Moore was still in New York, Aaron Rodgers would be happier, because honestly, without Garrett Wilson, it goes to like Randall Cobb real quick. And that's a hell of a drop off, I'm not saying that they're regretting that move, but man, that receiver core.
Allen Lazard's not your next sleeper, Andrew?
Yeah.
No, sir.
So Lazard's not your. I was just going to say the same thing. Good thinking, Rocky.
You guys are on the same page. And no, I am not a Lazard fan. I'm maybe a Cobb fan. I guess he's not even on this list. I don't think. Like he's on waivers in a bunch of leagues. I know. But no, I wanted to say this about Elijah Moore. I mean, Amari Cooper is wide receiver 30 right now. That feels embarrassing to me. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, that's the disrespect, like, just, I get not wanting to draft Deshaun Watson for some of the off the field stuff, and you don't like it and it's grimy. Okay, fine. I'm okay drafting Amari Cooper. I don't know why he's down at a wide receiver 30. Like, we're talking about
it's his age.
Fair, but I'm just saying we're talking about Elijah Moore possibly getting 1,000 yards. Like, Amari Cooper is going to get 1,000 yards without even blinking. Like, that to me is like a no-brainer in my mind. Like, he might go for 1,500. You know what I'm saying? Like, at wide receiver 30, he's going just behind Treylon Burks and just ahead of Zay Flowers, two guys that haven't proven anything. Like, give me Amari Cooper all day. That seems bonkers to me. So, and again, I think Elijah Moore is a great pick for this as a sleeper. I don't mind it at all. And I'm not going to pick Allen Lazard. I got a couple of names I could talk about. We talked about Cortland Sutton earlier. I don't need to get into why I think he's a sleeper, but I'm going to go higher because I feel like I don't want to leave Rocky as the only one up here at the top. I guess I'm kind of curious. It's interesting because I'm a Bengals fan. I know I'm biased. Is T. Higgins at wide receiver 13 a sleeper to anybody? Does that feel like, is that too high? Is that not high enough? Because I feel like there are definitely people that would consider that a bust. And I guess I just want to talk about this as a quote unquote sleeper. Is there a world where he and Chase are both top 10, top 8 kind of receivers? Now, granted, 13 to 10 isn't that big of a leap, right? But at that level, it could be. But he's going behind Cooper Kupp, which I know we're going to talk about at some point here tonight, Stephon Diggs, Devonta Smith, and then T. Higgins at 13. I mean, I know it's risky having a second receiver on the offense and all this, but I don't know. I'm still kind of in on Higgins. Is that my bias showing, John, or is that something you kind of have a vibe with too, or am I ridiculous?
I love T. Higgins. So, no, I don't think you're being ridiculous. And he's not the only second receiver off a team to land in the top 12. I mean, he's at 13. Devonta's right there at 12, and A.J. Brown is up at 4. So there's two sets of these right here and a couple that aren't far off. So, yeah, I like T. Higgins. And the thing is T. Higgins is going to produce with Jamar Chase. If something happens to Jamar Chase, T. Higgins is a stud with a capital F. Okay.
I like that.
Yeah. So that's why I like the price point there. I don't mind that price point at all. I don't know that I would necessarily qualify it as a sleeper because I do think there's things that have to happen for him to really take off to outperform that. But I do think he's going in a good range to perform better than cost.
Well, I'm looking at it too. Like I would rather have him over Hill, Kupp, Diggs, and Smith myself right now. I feel like, again, maybe be my bias showing, but I feel like Higgins as a top 10 makes sense to me. Rocky, what are your thoughts on Higgins? Am I ridiculous calling him a sleeper, which is entirely fair, or do you kind of get where I'm coming from?
I don't want to use the word ridiculous, but calling him a sleeper is a little much to me, just because he is at 13, and I have a hard time seeing him go up that much from there. I expect him to perform well, but I think he's always, even just if you're talking value, like in Dynasty, I just think the fact that Chase is there, it's going to be hard for the market to ever value him much higher than 12 or 13, while Chase is on this, in the same receiver room. So, I think he'll be fine. I think he'll be, he'll be what he's been in the past, where he'll go off some games. Chase will go off some games, and they'll both look pretty good at the end of the season. But I just kind of think he's more properly valued at 13, basically.
Entirely fair. Yeah, and again, after going with Thielen at 85, I figured I'd go with my quote-unquote biggest sleeper, as in top sleeper, not a sleeper at all. But also, it's kind of a hot take that's not a hot take, which is what makes it so fun. I think, are there any other sleepers, any other players you guys want to bring up before we get into busts? I know there's 100 names on this list. They can't all be sleepers, but is there anyone else that you feel like you wanted to mention before we move on? Are we good?
I'm good.
I think we're good.
I'm good.
Everybody can be a sleeper at the right price, right? That's the whole point. So let's move into our next segment here, which is the busts. A bust, again, is an interesting term. How do you define it? What are your thoughts? Why does he call it a bust? I mean, there's really no wrong way here. But again, if we just go with the general thought of a bust is someone you'd rather not draft at that price. Maybe that's the easiest way to generalize this. Rocky, I want to kick it back to you first. What would you pick as one of these guys on this list that you would consider a bust, or what's someone you feel like you're kind of out on, or you don't have any rostered or anybody rostered on your leagues?
This probably won't come as a major surprise for people who heard me talk about him when he came out as a rookie. I did not want to go with the older guys. To me, are kind of easier to go with. I wanted to try and pick a younger guy. So I'm going to say Drake London. I know people love Drake London. And I just have worries about I have worries about Desmond Ritter. I have worries about Arthur Smith and his love for running the ball, and then they just drafted Bijan Robinson and still have Tyler Algier on the roster. That could be a very run-heavy offense. And I still, I have worries about what the target share is going to be to go around with Kyle Pitt. Although Smith seems to also hate Kyle Pitts, so maybe I should worry more about Pitts than London. But Ritter and Smith are the big concerns for me. I'm not saying London's not talented, but I was never as high on him as everyone else was when he came out. I think he's good, not great, and if he has a subpar season, I do not think he will be wide receiver 14 next year, and I think that's very possible with the addition of Bijan, and just. I do not like Ritter at all, so I'm very worried about how that passing offense will be in general. And Smith may want to run the ball just to hide Ritter a little more anyway, especially because they could be competitive. So just because that division is a dumpster fire, so they might want to try and hide Ritter as much as possible, win games with Bijan and Algier, and not I expect the passing volume to be pretty low there. So that's
more of
what it comes down to for me.
Well, I'm more of a London fan than a London hater, but I don't mind your logic. I think you're entirely right. There are definitely some question marks with London, and kind of like what we talked about with Higgins at 13. How much higher can Drake London really get? Like if we're getting him at 14, which I think is actually pretty valued, that's valued appropriately. Like it's pretty accurate to me. I don't know if he's going to be a top 10 receiver. I mean, in Dynasty, that's asking a lot because there's a lot of really good receivers up there, and you're having to bump somebody out. And it's like, can Ritter actually, satisfy a top 10 receiver? I'm not sure. John, what are your thoughts on Drake London?
I've got to say, I was a little surprised to hear that, but then as Rocky kind of went through it, I'm like, no, I can understand where you're coming from. I still think London is priced close to appropriate. I mean, there's some people there that I would probably take over him in that range. But at the same time, you make some valid points. There is a lot to be concerned about with this offense, and you were correct in mentioning Arthur Smith as part of your concern list because we're well aware of what he can do to defy what we view as rational coaching. Yeah. So yeah, with those things in mind, I can see the point you're making, and there's some validity there.
Yeah, and to me, it's sort of I think how. A little bit how Andrew framed it at the top, where I do not want to pay the price, even if that's the appropriate price, given the way we treat young players and given a lot of people's evaluation of his talent. I don't want to. But to me, that's too risky of a price for me. Just because I'm not as big of a believer. Again, not that I think he's an awful player. I was a little lower coming out, and there's just so much situationally that bothers me there, and I could definitely see. I could see him being worth less than he is now by the end of the year because he doesn't perform up to expectations. That's kind of how I was looking at it.
I think it's more the price. Again, you just don't like the price. Wide receiver 14 just feels too rich. If Drake London was wide receiver 24, you'd be in. You're like, all right, definitely. I'll take that. That sounds great. But 14 is maybe his ceiling, and that's where you're like, I don't think he's going to meet that. And then if I'm paying that price, I kind of need him to meet that because that's a lot of asset you're putting in there. My first bust in the list is kind of going to maybe partner up with what I said before, where it's Deebo Samuel. Honestly, Deebo at wide receiver 18, as much as I like Ayuk at 23, I'm nervous about Deebo at 18, and kind of like what I said too, like Ayuk is an ascending asset. I think his ceiling is higher than Deebo. His future might be longer. Deebo's had some injury issues, and there's a lot of question marks around that. And then like obviously that team is in a transitional spot. Maybe that's the nicest way to put it, where they're not with Trey Lance ever, I guess, to be honest with you. They're going into this Brock Purdy situation. Mr. Irrelevant. He might not be there that long. It makes me nervous. And if I'm Deebo Samuel, I'm looking at this like it's now or never. Like it's shit or get off the pot. Like we got to make something happen this year because he had that. Was it 2020? He had that great year, like phenomenal year where he had like 1,200 yards or something. And then it just feels like the last 2 years have just been underwhelming. And wide receiver 18, I don't want underwhelming. Like that's the last thing I want to get. And I do think his ceiling may be higher than that, but I think his floor is way lower than that. And that's what makes me nervous is that, Deebo is 1 foot injury away from missing 6 games. And at that point, I'm scrambling on my waiver wires trying to put up somebody and, find somebody even in Dynasty that maybe on my bench that I can fill in. I don't like that. So for me, Deebo's a guy that I just find myself passing on every time it comes around. I'm like, Do I pick Debo or Christian Watson? Watson. Do I pick Debo or Jordan Addison? Addison. Do I pick Debo or Terry McLaurin? Terry McLaurin. Like every time there's a decision, I'm just not picking Debo, and then somebody else takes him, and I'm like, "Ooh, that's one less person for me to pick." But I know, Rocky, you were talking about Ayuk, but I mean, are you thinking the same as me that Debo might be a bust, or is that still a little bit harsh for you, maybe?
Uh, I think I would. Yeah, I don't think that's too harsh. Actually, I never know. I don't know what to make of Debo. Actually, like we saw what he did a couple of years ago and it was amazing. Uh, a lot of that was buoyed by the rushing that the run, the carries they gave him over the second half of the season, especially. So, and like I said, I am more of an Ayuk guy now, and the fact that you can get in on that offense at the receiver position around late. I mean, why would I want to take Debo? So,
Right.
Basically a round or so later, given the difference in ADP, you can probably get Ayuk. I'd rather just get Ayuk a little cheaper if we're talking a startup. It's funny though. It's funny how it's ADP. I do not think you're necessarily getting Ayuk cheaper in a trade.
Well, no, and that's a fair point. I was just going to say, if it was Debo or Ayuk, which side deserves the third? Which side deserves the extra piece, like something little to make this move happen? And
I think
honestly,
more people would want something added to Debo than added to
I was going to say it's
Ayuk.
whoever's sending it, whichever the two you're sending is going to require that extra piece to pry that other person away. You know what I mean? It's just that's how weird and close these two are. John, what are your thoughts on Debo Samuel before you get into your bust to the first list here?
Well, the fact is that at wide receiver, what are we at? 18 and wide receiver 23, and CMC is RB 1 to 3, somewhere in that range. Someone's gonna bust. It's Brock Purdy. It's not Justin Herbert. This isn't a highly drafted. Like, he can play the dink and dunk game and he can manage the offense, but is anybody expecting him to roll out a 4,500-yard season? The answer is no. So someone is going to bust. So is that Debo? Is that Ayuk? Is that Kittle? I mean, there's a bunch of question marks there, but a lot of Debo's value, and Rocky kind of mentioned it too, was buoyed by carries and touchdowns that he got on the ground, which he's not going to get with CMC in town. They're going to try to, filter all that through CMC now. So it does create more risk to bust with a reduced workload. So he is the leading candidate of that group that I think has the biggest potential to bust.
Outside of CMC, he's also the most expensive, so that's the easiest to bust. If you get the most value, you get the most way to fall to zero. It's kind of my logic on that too. So, John, which one was what would be your first bust candidate on this list of 100 receivers?
So, yeah, and I want to preface this, and I know I talked to you guys about it backstage before we came on. I don't want anybody to think that the news today influenced this. I wrote all my notes for this stuff a day and a half ago. It's Cooper Kupp. And as much as I love Cooper Kupp and know what he's capable of in the field, this is a twofold concern. It's not just Cooper Kupp, it's also Matthew Stafford. Cooper Kupp is going off as wide receiver 10 right now. And he's got among the highest ceiling of any of all these receivers in football. We saw it last year before he got injured. He still finished with more PPR points per game than Justin Jefferson was, by a small margin, but he was doing it. Now we're looking at Matthew Stafford, who's coming off a spinal cord contusion. If those words don't frighten you, you haven't watched enough House, Grey's Anatomy, or ER. Okay?
Yeah.
He's 35 years old. This injury has long-term implications and heightened risks of causing further re-aggravation and or damage to extremities. That's not what you want for someone who relies on his tinglies. Okay? So you've got an injury risk from Matthew Stafford, and today's news kind of factored into exactly what I wrote down. Kupp is 30 years old. He had a high ankle sprain that required tightrope surgery. Again, if you're not familiar with tightrope surgery, I'm going to refer you to House or Scrubs. And then he had a hamstring injury that he suffered on August 1st, and news came out today that he re-aggravated it, and now he's behind schedule. And so you have to worry about all those things. And at wide receiver 10, ouch. That concerns me quite a bit.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And I think too, with this new injury on Kupp, I feel it gives a lot of people that were excited about Kupp, and myself included, I was excited to see him come back. And I feel like one of the main reasons I was excited about Cup was kind of like what we said about these other quarterbacks. Like you don't think Stafford's going to throw for 3,000 yards, and you don't think a Cup is going to get half of those because who else is there? Van Jefferson, Puka Nacua, like maybe Tyler Higbee gets some yardage, and maybe Cam Akers. Like again, it's more of just because of the funnel. I like the opportunity, right? But
sure.
Cup has now an injury history, and that's risky in a sense that like I don't like that. And again, at Cooper Kupp at wide receiver 10 in Dynasty, have we not learned our lesson on this? Like he just feels like one of those guys that's on the decline. He's over that age apex in a sense. And I don't hate the player. I hate the price. 10 is just too high for me. Rocky, what are your thoughts on Cooper Kupp?
I think you both pretty much summed it up pretty well. I agree with you that it's tough to take that gamble. And I think the big thing John pointed out is that you're taking the gamble really on two guys, on Stafford and Kupp. And both could have reasons to have health concerns going into this year. Both are older players. Both are coming off major injuries. And as we said, we've just found out that, that Kupp has re-aggravated his injury. So, but even before that, there was reason to be concerned. So, I just want to agree with you guys and just stress that the idea that you're actually, if you're taking the shot on Kupp, you have to depend on Kupp to stay healthy and Stafford to stay healthy and both to perform at the previous levels, which is, to me, kind of a big risk.
That is a risky move for sure. I'll get into my second bust then. There are some different names that I could pick, and there's definitely lots of options. I mean, again, it depends a little bit on how you define bust, right? But the one that I keep finding myself, just like Debo, that I keep finding myself not drafting is Calvin Ridley. I mean, wide receiver 21, I feel like is hopium incarnate. Like Calvin Ridley was gone for a whole year. I mean, obviously he wasn't like hurt or anything. He wasn't in any way damaged. It was more of a off the field thing with the gambling and all this. He comes back wearing the jersey 0, and I'm worried that's his floor. I'm just terrified that he's not going to put it together. And I think Christian Kirk is kind of another sleeper option I thought about, but I didn't want to spend all my time on the Jaguars. But Calvin Ridley, a wide receiver 21, just feels like we didn't even miss a beat. And he's on a new offense. He's had a year off. He's a year older. There's a lot of question marks if he's going to be the top asset there. We saw Trevor Lawrence really, in all honesty, do well with Christian Kirk last year. And in my head too, it's like, why are we drafting Ridley ahead of Kirk? I mean, Christian Kirk is wide receiver 35. I don't quite follow that. Like, I don't know what happened in the world where all of a sudden Ridley is the wide receiver 1. I just don't follow that. So again, I hate the price, not the player. I think Ridley's a terrific player. I hope he comes back. I hope that this works. But I don't like drafting hope at 21. Like, that's a lot of asset value that you have to put into a guy that you haven't seen play football in a while and might not be the same guy we saw. So I'd rather have Kirk at his price than Ridley at his. Rocky, what do you think? Am I crazy on this one, or do you agree with me here?
Yeah, I tend to think they're going to try and make Ridley the guy, but I see what you're saying in that it's almost a full 2 years out of the league at this point. Yeah. He kind of left for mental health reasons fairly early 2 years ago in the season, and then had the whole year suspension. So I also find it hard to believe we're just going to see like primo Calvin Ridley now, a couple years older and not having played for 2 seasons. So I'm very interested to see how that does break down. I like I said, I think they might try and get him more targets than anyone else there, but I don't know if he's going to be the same player he was. And I don't know if he's going to be a bust, because I still could see him even not living up to expectations, but still being wide receiver 2-ish, which is kind of what the range he's in here. But I definitely see the potential there for it to just totally, to totally bomb if he's just not the same player he was with 2 years out of the league, basically.
John, what do you think about these Jacksonville receivers? Are you in or out on Ridley at 21?
At 21, I'm gonna let someone else assume the risk. I'm in the same vein as you. Like, I'm obviously very concerned about someone that hasn't played the game at game speed versus big fast corners in 2 years. Have the camp videos looked awesome? Yes. Do I remember him being wide receiver? What was it, 5? The last full season he played. Like, I love all that, and that's great, and I'm rooting for him. But I'm rooting for him, not at that price. So I'm not rooting
for
for
him
him
on
with
someone
my
else's
roster.
team. Yeah.
So yeah, he's definitely one of the people that I would have considered for this conversation, because it's just like you said, it's the price. It's not him. I want to see him do well. I'm not investing a wide receiver 21 cost.
Well, ultimately, too, I'd rather wait a couple of weeks in the season when I think his value may drop a little more, because people have that hopium that wears off, right? Everybody's the "what have you done for me lately?" And again, like you said, Rocky, almost 2 years, right? Almost 2 years out of the league. It's very possible that he struggles out of the gate, and whoever has Ridley at this moment is maybe a contending team and is not happy with that scoring and doesn't want him on the bench because they spent so much to get him. I mean, hell, there were conversations that he was going for a first in some places earlier this offseason. I mean, that's insane to me. Like, I'm not willing to spend that kind of draft capital on a player that may not play long. Or again, I'm not trying to say this is a negative. We all have our own issues and mental health issues. And again, him coming back to the game might be good for him. It might not be. I mean, there is an entirely possible situation where he comes back, gets back in the rhythm, and it starts to be like, man, this is exactly what I didn't like. I mean, triggers are triggers, man. You can't always say, what it's going to be. So I really do hope I'm with you, John. I hope he does well. I hope he's awesome. I hope he's wide receiver 5. I hope I'm wrong, right? And I have no problem at all being wrong. I'm just a dude. What do I know? But I hope Calvin Ridley gets whatever help he needs and is in a good spot and is mentally ready to tackle this. But that's just too many questions in my book. So, Rocky, what's your other bust for this list? What other players would you want to pick? Anybody?
To be honest, I didn't have anyone that really stood out for me. I know we didn't write down our names before the episode, but by definition to me, bust has to be one of these top end guys.
It's usually, you can't put Robert Woods as a bust. You know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
No one cares. Like, of course he is. He's at the bottom of the list. Yeah.
So I didn't really have one that stuck out to me. The one guy on here, I guess maybe a little bit that I think I'm significantly lower on the most is, but he's further down the list is Treylon Burks at wide receiver 29.
I thought about him. Yep.
He's had injury issues. I did like him coming out, but he didn't produce a ton last year. He's got a bad quarterback situation, but they're also probably not going to be bad enough that they get anyone significantly better next year. So, and now he's got DeAndre Hopkins there, which could take coverage off of him, but also could take targets away from him. So, I don't know that there's much room to go up here for him. I think it's a bad situation. I think the talent is decent, but I don't really think he's ever gonna take off and get much higher than this in terms of value, probably in terms of production either. I am not a believer in Will Levis either. So if you're telling me Tannehill's going to get benched for Levis, that's not a good thing to me.
No, and Treylon Burks at wide receiver 29 is scary in a way. I agree. He's coming off an injury. Obviously, he's very talented, but it's interesting to think back to that draft. Remember the Eagles traded their pick to Tennessee in exchange for A.J. Brown. My God, does that trade look amazing right now? Like that trade just looks like a slam dunk. You know what I mean? Not even fantasy related, just NFL related. What a difference those two players are. John, what are your thoughts on wide receiver 29, Treylon Burks? Are you in or are you out at that price?
So I'm going to be honest. I'm going to try to be as objective as possible. But for those of you who don't know, Razorback. So there's a little bit of that going on here. I was disappointed. I had obviously big expectations for Treylon Burks coming in, especially to fill a role, right? They shipped A.J. Brown and brought in Treylon Burks, someone that, from a physical standpoint, from a talent standpoint, could have operated in a similar fashion. I'm not going to say the same because A.J. Brown is a specimen, but he disappointed, and I got all excited for all the good stuff out of camp and how comfortable he looks in the offense and every puff piece that came out. And then he ends up hurt, and they bring in DeAndre Hopkins. And you're right, that could lead to softer coverage, and that's a good thing, but it's still taking targets away. It's still a low volume passing. However, the flip side to that is there's no one else to throw to. You got those two guys. You're not throwing to the running back. Tight end is still like a up in the air question mark.
And remember, Kyle Phillips went to IR. So
that's right.
Kyle Phillips went to IR. They're literally throwing to bums that were outside the stadium that morning. So I don't like the price tag. All that being said, I want to be optimistic for Treylon Burks because he's a Razorback, a former Razorback, and I do think he's a talented receiver. Wide receiver 29 is maybe a few spots higher than I want to take him, but I'm hopeful he has a good season, turns things around, and shows a little bit of what made him such a fun guy to watch when he was a Razorback.
I just like to say I hope he does too, because I talked about London before. I had him higher than London when they were coming out. So I think I had Burks as like my wide receiver 2 or 3, and London was like 4 or 5. So I hope you're right, and I hope I'm wrong.
Well, again, it's always the price, not the player. I hope the player is great. I hope the player kicks ass. I hope he does great and is a terrific player this year and does all the things he wants to do. But in fantasy football and dynasty football, that price is just a little steep. I'm right there with you. John, who is your second bust before we move on in the show tonight? Who else do you think is a little overrated here tonight?
Michael Pittman, wide receiver 26. I've never been fully on board with Michael Pittman. He's better than just a guy for sure. But does he belong in the same conversation with Jerry Jeudy, DJ Moore, Chris Godwin? Like, I feel like he's the odd man out. It's like Sesame Street. One of these things doesn't look like the other. Yep. So at the price point, they're starting a rookie quarterback that is prone to take off running. And can we say he has some accuracy issues that he's working on? Is that fair assessment?
Yeah, right. Is that what they say? Yeah.
So Michael Pittman has survived on volume, and that volume is going to really shift because the handful of games I've watched from Anthony Richardson, he's not looking short to intermediate. He's looking to take off running or chuck it deep. It takes away kind of that intermediate section of the field, which is something he's going to have to learn. But I don't see Michael Pittman producing in a fashion to pay for his wide receiver 26 price tag.
Yeah, Pittman was on my short list too. Rocky, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I love that choice. The thing that pops into my head too is JJ Zacharyson has mentioned many times about the difficulties of wide receivers. If you listen to his podcast, dealing with rookie quarterbacks, regardless of how decent of a prospect they are coming out of college, and as John kind of alluded to, Richardson is not the most polished passing prospect coming out of college. A lot of upside. But I'm not expecting that to really pan out in year one from a passing perspective. So I just think Pittman is going to be a huge disappointment this year specifically. I just think it's going to maybe if Richardson can kind of grow into the role, he's a little more raw as a passer, maybe down the road. But and then at that point, you're getting to the point where everyone's complaining Michael Pittman's too old anyway. Because he's going to be 27 or 28.
Can't win them all. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Pittman is an interesting one because I love the talent in spurts. Like there are times where he makes plays and I'm like, oh, that's the guy. But I don't see it consistently enough. And it just makes me worried with it. Like, again, with a running quarterback, rookie especially, it's like, and then Jonathan Taylor not being there, like this offense just could be a dud a little bit. I mean, again, we've been saying it all night, right? If Anthony Richardson's going to throw for 3,000 yards, who's catching those yards? It's probably Pittman, I guess. You got Josh Downs, the rookie, and Alec Pierce. Like someone's going to have to catch these, maybe Mo Alley Cox. But it just like, I guess I get it. But again, there's too many question marks for wide receiver 26. That price just feels too steep. I'm right there with you. Is there anybody else you guys want to mention, or do you think we've covered enough of the negative on this and we're ready to move along? I'm good. I think we've done a pretty good job of this.
Yeah, I think we're good.
I think we're good.
Perfect. All right. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to move on to the trade. We did have a trade in Dynasty Junkies 1. Rocky, I'm not even sure if you saw this. I accepted it. It was our team.
I did see it. Yeah.
So we were given
it's a massive deal we made here.
Look out, buddy. This is a league breaker. We were given Tyler Huntley in exchange for Daniel Bellinger. I took that because I'm like, well, a QB versus a tight end. I'll take Tyler Huntley. And we have Lamar Jackson in that league, so it's kind of like a handcuff, I guess. But also Huntley could get some play at some point. I don't know. You never know. Lamar Jackson might just want to sit again. It's the only trade of the week. pretty weak compared to other weeks. But also, I just wanted to make sure you were aware of it, Rocky, because I accepted it.
I'm glad you.
No real reason to get into it. I just wanted to mention.
I wasn't aware of it initially until I was looking at our roster the other day, and then I was like, "Oh, he actually accepted that trade."
Yeah, I figured why not. We need some content. So let's move ahead then to our final segment of the night. I know we're getting already over an hour tonight. We're going to move into the Find Me a Trade segment. This one is submitted by listener Adam Savage at Sav852-48191. I don't know what the numbers are, but I love it. The league is the Fumble Brewski League. It's a 12-team PPR, half tight end premium extra with a super flex spot. So it's start 10, 1 QB, 2 running backs, 3 receivers, tight end, 2 flex, and a super flex. And Rocky, if you want to start reading off some of his notes there, I don't know if you need to read the whole thing, but kind of chunk through that if you want while I bring up the roster. That'd be great.
Sure, yeah. Adam says that they're entering year 3 of the league, It was his first Dynasty league, made some bad decisions during the startup. But the league has a 3-year champion kind of scoring system where they get a payout based off of playoff wins and championships. And he's made the playoff a couple times, and he's second in points for that. So he's thinking about possibly going for this year since his team is already older anyway. So he says QBs are weak as well as RB depth. And then it's pretty much a 4-way race for the championship this year between him and a few other guys. It will definitely take some luck to get there, just not sure what direction to go. So it looks like he's kind of leaning towards wanting to kind of go for it to get that. It sounds like if he were to win the championship this year, he'd get that 3-year pot.
Yeah.
So he's kind of trying to, I think, look to go more into win this year than anything. But that's basically where he's at.
I do think he's a contender, and we'll kind of get through the team real quick here. So he's got Derek Carr, Matt Stafford, Daniel Jones, and Dorian Thompson-Robinson at quarterback. I mean, those are 3 middling, maybe QB2 kind of options, but I still think there's some options there to win. I think you could maybe push that in. Daniel Jones might be the best of the bunch. Running back, he's got the aforementioned Jonathan Taylor, what we talked about a lot. Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs, Tank Bigsby, Elijah Dotson, Latavius Murray, Zeke Elliott, Deion Jackson, who's backing up Taylor. Keaton Mitchell, some other guys. I mean, again, I don't hate it, but I'm not really wowed by it. Oh, he's got Michael Carter to go with Hall. Receivers, he's got Mike Evans, Stephon Diggs, Mike Williams, Darius Slayton, Deontay Johnson, Devonta Smith, Josh Palmer, Tyler Scott, Xavier Hutchinson. Pretty good mix of receivers there. And at tight end, the one and only Travis Kelce, it's all you need, and Mike Gesicki. I want to kick it to you first, John. What do you think of this team, and what trade or kind of where were your thoughts when you saw this team? What kind of trade would you want to make if you had this roster?
Well, I think it's important to point out that he's traded some assets to get there, and I don't have it up on my screen, but he doesn't have a pick until 25, if I remember correctly.
He's missed his entire 24 correct. Fleet. Yep.
Right. So we're working with limited assets, so we've got to operate with that. And I do want to point something out, and we talked about this a little bit backstage before we came on. Handcuffing especially in Dynasty is you can do it a couple different ways, and people do operate it different ways. But one of the things I don't like here, because it's clogging, is we have 2 sets in the running back room. We have 2 sets of handcuffs, right? We've got Michael Carter and Breece Hall, and we've got Jonathan Taylor, and we've got Deion Jackson. And I understand the idea is like, oh, if Jonathan Taylor goes down, I can insert Deion Jackson. That's fine. We've got 2 sets of those. So you've got 4 roster spots being held down by only 2 of them are going to start. So you're conceptually missing 2 roster spots there. I do that differently. I'm one that if I'm going to back up a running back, I will back up one of my running backs, but I'm more likely to take someone else's handcuff for trade value purposes. For if I've got a good running back and then someone else's good running back goes down, I now have 2 good starters versus it took me missing one to have one become a starter. And that's what I mean by missing those roster spots. So I'm not crazy about that aspect. And the asset thing is going to be different too. So what I think should be done here, if he really wants to go all in, is look for the boring players you can get on the cheap. Boring productive players, the Adam Thielens, this is kind of gross, but I'm going to say it. I was actually tweeting about it earlier. Tyler Higbee. Tyler Higbee is one of the cheapest 85 to 90 target players you can get. And with not much else in the receiving option room, those are the kind of players I would be targeting because you don't have the draft capital to go get a bunch of studs.
Yep. No, I love that logic. And I was just circling Tyler Higbee here on the screen is by the manager blind, which it's an interesting name to have, but he's also got Mark Andrews. So whoever the Higbee manager there doesn't necessarily need Higbee. And I think that's a terrific idea too, to fill a flex spot, which you have, I think it's 2 flex spots, right? So 3 receivers, 2 flex, like you've got some options for tight end and a tight end premium. That Tyler Higbee, you're right. Silent, but deadly. Honestly, I love it. Rocky, what kind of a trade did you come up with for our buddy Adam here?
Okay. So I think I did something to this, maybe couple months ago, something similar to this where, kind of not a straightforward trade where I agree he should be going for it, but what I did was I put this on the sheet. I was going for the points when it totally seems like I'm doing the opposite. But Jonathan Taylor, and I'm trading him to I guess it's Drubel's 13 for a 24 first and a 24 second. And my thinking there though is kind of like a cascading trade type of thing where not everyone's going to want Taylor. This guy might not want Taylor, so maybe you don't get this done. But he has 2 firsts and 3 seconds. You got to find kind of sort of the right kind of team to take Taylor. And I thought maybe this might be it because he's sort of not really in great shape, but he's also rostering like Alexander Madison and Rashad Penny. So I don't know what he's thinking here. So maybe it doesn't look like he's got in a great spot to contend, but maybe he thinks he can eventually. And Taylor's not old yet. And it is selling low. Depending on where the first and second are valued, like I would be fine taking like a mid to late first and a mid to late second if that's what the guy wants. And then my thinking was that he could think he's buying him low, and I don't know that Taylor's value ever goes up if that kind of disaster season happens that we're worried about. Yeah. And this way you get out of that worry about it. You're not getting points from him for the first month at least anyway, possibly more. And then the idea would be that you then turn the first and second into players. So, you get Amari Cooper for a second or, a second plus, or you get somebody value. I don't have a name off the top of my head, but someone valued at a late first that you can pick up that will score you points. And then you turn a guy that's not getting you points for the first month into potentially maybe older, but 2-point scoring players that first and seconds will you don't have to worry if they're going to stub their toe. So you'll be able to sell them all season. And again, you might have trouble selling Taylor to Drubel's 13, but also, like I said, you're selling low, so he can look at it as I'm buying low and it's worth the shot. And then you get the points that you can put in your lineup. Well, unfortunately, I didn't give him specific names to do afterwards, but
that's okay.
You got to do a little work on your own here too. So, but that was what I was thinking, that you could then shop around the first and the second, maybe right away, maybe you wait and see a month, a few weeks into the season, and see who's doing well or what you want, who already looks like their team is crap or something like that.
Well,
but
on that note, that's actually where I went first with this team. Is I saw he had Jonathan Taylor, and I'm like, well, that's who I'm shipping, right? So I looked at who had Kyler Murray, I looked at who had Trey Lance, I looked at who had Jameson Williams, like some of these guys that are like pure cut, like rebuild roster, signatories. Like I can signify with my roster, I know I've got this. Well, the guy that's got Kyler Murray has a bunch of other quarterbacks, so he doesn't really need Kyler Murray. He doesn't really have a ton at running back, so maybe he's trying to contend, maybe he's not. His team is looking a little weak. So I'm like, I don't even know if there's really anybody I want on that team outside of a quarterback. Maybe Sam Laporta, which was chat and crash. The other one I saw was whoever had Trey Lance. He's got C.J. Stroud and Will Levis, and he doesn't have anybody. His running back room though is Brian Robinson, Kendry Miller, Dwayne McBride. Like there's really nobody there. Maybe you could get a receiver out of him. And then I'm looking at his receivers, and I'm like, I don't really want any of those receivers. Maybe Zay Flowers, so just like it didn't feel like I could find a good fit. So I'm glad you were able to at least pick an idea that I didn't think of either. Just like trading for picks and then trade the picks for something. I think that's a good move, like a pick and a half, trade and a half kind of a thing. John, what do you think about that? Are you kind of on board with Jonathan Taylor, at least on value for a first and a second, or would you want more?
If you honestly, with the unknown of right now, a first and a second is not losing too much for me to think maybe that's worth especially in a case like this, where if you could do something with that and you could take down, if you're like, what was he saying? He was second for the 3-year pot. So if you're really trying to make a run for it, let's get rid of the unknown. Let's get some production in here. And if you can sell for not too much undervalued, then and turn it into a championship, then go for it.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And that's kind of where my trade was in the same mindset. Like, I don't like necessarily trading away future assets in a league that, is one of these 3-year cycle things. It is a super flex league, of course. And I agreed where he said his quarterbacks were his weak spot. I would say, well, maybe that's where I can maybe increase somewhere and kind of get a difference maker at QB. I know there are some question marks around Joe Burrow. So I'm like, well, maybe I can get Joe Burrow in a trade. And maybe people are still kind of concerned, I guess, or uncertain about his future. So my trade was with Tyler Gurking. It was going to be sending Daniel Jones, Stephon Diggs, and your own 25 first for Joe Burrow and Cortland Sutton. Now, I think this might still, might need another piece. It might be overselling. It's kind of hard to say. Every league is different. But Daniel Jones is kind of on the upswing right now. A lot of people seem to like him. Stephon Diggs is definitely a top 10 receiver in most situations, as we just talked about. I don't think he's a bust. And then adding that 25 first, again, kind of gives the guy an out to be like, all right, well, I'm downgrading at QB, but I'm upgrading at receiver and I get a first out of it. And giving up Burrow and Sutton, I think Burrow is obviously going to be your main starter on this, but that gives you Burrow, Carr, and Stafford. I think Sutton slots into this team pretty well. You've still got Devonta Smith and Mike Evans, Mike Williams. Like, you've still got some point scorers. I just feel like I would rather have the stability of Joe Burrow than the maybe stability of Stephon Diggs. And then giving up your first, it might be a little heavy. Maybe you only have to give up your second, or I guess you don't have it, so it'd be a third, or maybe you don't give up a pick at all. Maybe you can kind of pull this off with just Stephon Diggs and Daniel Jones. Who knows? But that was kind of where my brain went to try to get an upgrade somewhere. Rocky, what do you think? Am I way off base, or does that seem like a fair trade to you for Joe Burrow?
I think for a lot of people that might be a little light, just because of how highly we value those top 4 to 5 guys.
Sure.
Especially with it being a 25 first. Maybe if it was a 24 first. Looking at it though, he if this matters to him, he does not have a 25 first, so it might help in that regard.
Oh, you mean Gurking doesn't?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah.
So I don't know how much he cares about that, because it's still 2 years down the road. But I do kind of, and also just this coincidentally, I don't even know if you were thinking of this when you made the deal, but Cooper Kupp he has too. So that actually could help if you're striking right now. If I can get this podcast out by like tomorrow and you hear this, well, I guess in the next week or two.
I'll tag him on Twitter. It's live on there. He can listen there. Yeah.
So and he's got other older receivers too. He's potentially more likely to be injury prone. I guess Diggs is up in age too, but I think with the Kupp injury, it could only help this deal. And Diggs, I mean, Diggs is quite an add-on to Jones to try and do this, and the first doesn't hurt. I will say I did kind of look at quarterback. I would actually, you know me, I would be okay going in with these quarterbacks. Of
course you would.
Especially with 3 of them. I think all 3. I like having 3 guys that I think all can potentially produce, even if they're mid-range guys. And you can kind of rotate them and see who's doing well, see matchups, things like that. Obviously, none of them is really QB1 material, but I think he could be fine here with the rest of the roster if it's good enough. And like I said, that's kind of what I was looking at, was trying to upgrade the rest of the roster. But I totally I did look at quarterback too. I just didn't find anything that I loved trying to do with that.
The other thing is Tyler Gurking only has Josh Allen and Joe Burrow. I feel like maybe he could use a little depth somewhere else, and maybe he could, maybe make a trade for 2 of these quarterbacks or something. Like maybe you trade Daniel Jones and Derek Carr for Burrow or something. Maybe you come up with a trade like that to give that guy 3, but then you're stuck with 2. So I didn't really want to do that. Like that felt a little risky to me. I like having 3 of these instead of the other 2. The other thing is, there is some logic in saying, and DTC actually backs this up a little bit. Joe Burrow, and in their calculator, again, it's just one asset. It's one tool in the toolbox. But DTC has Burrow at 65.6, which is a hell of a lot. But if you do the 25 first, Daniel Jones and Stephon Diggs in this, it's 63.9. So it's pretty close value-wise. Not that that's the arbiter of truth, but at least it's a close enough idea. That's without Sutton. So my thought was I would send it with Sutton, and then if they decline, send it without Sutton and see what they say, right? Some people are really high on him this year. And sometimes I've done this too, where it's like I send the offer. It's not a big deal difference, but if I remove a piece, then that guy immediately feels like, oh, now that's more in line with my value. So it's kind of, I don't want to say it's a mirage. It's not like I'm faking him out, but it's like, if I send it a little heavier and I just remove that other piece I'm asking for, sometimes that's to be like, all right, that's better. I'll take it. You know what I mean? Like sometimes that can not trick somebody, but make it feel like an easier thing to digest. But John, what do you think about this trade and just in general about acquiring a better QB for this team?
I love the thought that you guys put into the trades in this, because I'll be honest with you, I struggled to find what I felt like would be mutually beneficial for both
they're
parties.
Tough sometimes, man.
Yeah, and because every team there has some nice pieces, some strong stuff, and it seems like the teams in this league where they're good, they're great, and where they're not, whoo. And so that makes it hard to swap my whoo for your woo. And so
hashtag analysis. That's brilliant.
Yeah, right. So the thought process you guys put into it is pretty impressive. I like some of that. I do think trying to chase quarterback in a super flex or tight end, like you've got Travis Kelce, obviously, but you need to focus, you need to hone in on those two, because your running back room is going to change more consistently than everything else. So don't put as much focus in running back. Focus on the stuff you're going to have for a minute. You're going to have some of these tight ends for a while. You're going to have the good quarterbacks you're going to have for a while. So trying to focus in on those areas is the smart way to go, I think, moving forward.
Yeah, and I think we gave you some good ideas here, Adam. Hopefully you can go forth and find a trade and maybe, hit us up on Twitter. Let us know what you think. Send us a DM. I know I was sending him some DMs earlier. I don't know if you responded to any of those yet, but point is, if you hear this and if you can come up with something, we love hearing our listeners come up and come back to us and say, here's what I was able to pull off. I know I was talking with, I forget his name from last week. We were talking to finding some trades, and he was like, yeah, they shut me down on all of those, just auto rejects. I'm like, man, that league is brutal. So you never know. Every league is different, but that's why I like this exercise if nothing else. It also helps stretch my own brain to be like, all right, what would I do? Where would I go? I got a bunch of leagues, and every now and then I do one of these. I'm like, oh, I actually have some of these players in this league. Maybe I should make that trade. So it's a lot of fun. It's a good time. And if you have a league that you guys want us to do for you, you got a team that's struggling or you can't find trades. Obviously, as we enter the season, now gets to be a weird time, but feel free to submit your own team to find me a trade. We have that on our pinned tweet still on Twitter or X, whatever it's called these days. But with that, I think we've done a pretty good job. We're at the 91-minute mark. We've gone really long. As usual, Rocky and I can't shut up. We're just terrific. But thank you so much for bearing with us on this, John. I guess before we get out of here, where can people find you and what are you up to this season as you work for these guys at these different sites?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter or X, whatever, at John_Hesterman. I will have a weekly DFS article up for Fantasy Pros. Dynasty content does slow down a little bit for me during the course of the season. And then on Twitter or X again, a lot of times you can catch me Fridays and Saturdays and sometimes Sunday morning doing start sit, doing last minute DFS tune-up stuff. So find me there, follow me there. I always want to answer questions. Hit me up.
Love it. Yeah. Thanks so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. I know it's been a while. I've talked to you for years and I feel like we just keep missing on getting you on. So I'm glad we were able to make this work.
I am too. I appreciate you guys inviting me. It was a really good time.
It was a good time. I think we had some good conversation. Definitely getting into those receivers is always a good time. Definitely follow us on the Twitter or the X. I'm just going to keep calling Twitter at Dynasty Junkies.
Yeah. Nobody calls it X.
Not yet anyway. On Twitter at Dynasty Junkies. You can follow me at Andrew Hall FF. You can follow Rocky at Dynasty FF Addict. Subscribe, rate, and review. Follow the DAP Network at DAP_network, I believe, on Twitter. Or DAP Network on YouTube. Of course, we go live there most Thursdays, except we've got an update for the listeners here at the end of the show. Rocky is going to be on next week. I'm out of town. We're going to be on doing kind of like a live game watch, just kind of taking questions, maybe seeing what we can get into. I don't want to speak for you, Rocky, but I'm sure you're going to have a good time with that. And then we're probably going to take a couple of weeks off in September and just kind of let our minds reset a little bit. We feel like Dynasty gets to be a little bit, I don't know, stale and quiet at the beginning of the season. It turns into redraft, and there's a ton of content out there already. So we're going to take this time and reset, get our minds right, and then come back full strength in October. Hopefully having a ready-to-go mindset and help some of our listeners, again, rebuild or contend, whatever you need to do. But with that, Rocky, I'll kick it to you to say hi to the fans and get us out of here for the evening.
Yeah, thanks. I want to just say thanks again to John for coming on. It was a great show. Really happy to be, again, like I said at the beginning, getting to talk to Andrew again here on Junkies. Been quite a few weeks. Also, as always, before we sign off, got to give a shout out to the chat. It was hopping
Yes.
pretty good tonight. I think I saw on the little counter here we had 10 people watching at one point.
Yep.
A lot of them commenting in the chat. Matthew Wiggins, Jason Reel, Dame Overboard, Mr. Scampers, my boy Savi from TA3. So a lot of good people. Jesse Shot.
Yeah.
So who's in one of the Junkies listeners. So is Matthew, by the way.
Yep.
So many people. We appreciate you watching. We appreciate you commenting. It makes it so much more fun. But we've been going over 90 minutes now. There you go. Fly Eagles fly. We've been going over 90 minutes now. So I'm going to finish us up. Junkies out.